Every crime creates a rift, a moment where life splits in two. At Crime Rift, we uncover the quiet details, the unanswered questions, and the choices that change everything. Tonight's story begins in a place that felt safe, until it wasn't. This is Crime Rift. The town of Moscow, Idaho had always been known as the kind of place where nothing truly terrible happened. It was quiet, predictable, and safe in a way that allowed people to leave doors unlocked and walk home alone after midnight without thinking twice. For decades, violent crime in Moscow was almost non-existent. Parents felt comfortable sending their children there for college. Students built routines around late-night study sessions, weekend parties, and early morning classes. It was the kind of environment where danger felt like something that happened somewhere else to someone else. But in the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022, that illusion shattered forever. Four University of Idaho students were inside a rented off-campus house on King Road. It was a familiar house to many students, a place where friends gathered, where laughter had echoed through hallways, where memories were made in the ordinary chaos of college life. Inside that house were Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. Each of them had stories that were still being written. Kaylee Goncalves was preparing for graduation. She was known as outgoing, energetic, and deeply connected to her friends and family. She had plans to move to Texas for a new job, excited about stepping into adulthood with confidence and independence. Her family described her as someone who loved fiercely and lived fully. Madison Mogen, Kaylee's closest friend, had a personality that balanced warmth and calmness. Friends often described her as the emotional anchor in their group. She worked hard, cared deeply about her relationships, and shared countless future plans with Kaylee. They had spent years building memories together, never imagining their final night would also be shared. Xana Kernodle had a different energy entirely. She was vibrant, expressive, and unapologetically herself. She was known for her humor and her ability to make friends feel instantly comfortable. She balanced school, work, and relationships while still managing to stay connected with her family. Ethan Chapin was visiting Xana that night. He was part of a close-knit family of triplets and was widely known among friends as kind-hearted and supportive. Ethan's presence in the house that night was simple and ordinary. He was there to spend time with someone he cared about. None of them knew that in just a few hours, their lives would end violently inside a place they believed was safe. The night of November 12th began like countless other college weekends. Students moved between parties, downtown restaurants, and friend gatherings. Kaylee and Madison spent time at local venues, laughing, talking, and enjoying their last semester together. Xana and Ethan attended a party as well, socializing with friends and following the rhythms of campus life. By approximately 2 a.m., everyone had returned home. The house on King Road settled into silence. Lights turned off, doors closed. The ordinary stillness of sleep filled the rooms. Somewhere in the darkness between 4 o'clock and 4:25 a.m., investigators believe someone entered the home. There were no immediate signs of forced entry. No alarms were triggered. The house, like many college rentals, had multiple entry points and a constant flow of visitors. That familiarity may have made it easier for someone to move through unnoticed. What followed has been described by investigators as fast, targeted, and extremely violent. The attacker used a knife, moving through the house with devastating efficiency. The absence of gunshots meant neighbors remained asleep. The attack relied on silence, proximity, and physical force. One of the most haunting aspects of the crime is how little disruption was reported. No calls from neighbors, no reports of a prolonged struggle that echoed outside. It was as if the violence existed within the walls of the house, hidden from the world until morning. Hours passed. Inside the home were surviving roommates who remained physically unharmed. As daylight approached and the routine of morning began, confusion slowly turned into alarm when attempts to contact their friends failed. At 11:58 a.m., a 911 call was made. The caller reported an unconscious person. Dispatchers initially treated it as a possible medical emergency. When officers arrived, They immediately recognized the scale of what had happened. The scene was overwhelming, for young adults had been killed in their own home. Investigators began securing the area, calling additional units, and initiating what would quickly become one of the most scrutinized homicide investigations in modern American history. News spread rapidly across campus and across the country. The reaction was immediate and emotional. Students began leaving campus out of fear. Parents demanded answers. National media descended on the small town, transforming Moscow into the center of a nationwide conversation about safety, violence, and the unknown. The uncertainty was terrifying. Police initially stated there was no immediate threat to the public, but without a suspect or motive, that reassurance felt fragile. Speculation quickly filled the void left by limited official information. Social media became flooded with theories, accusations, and amateur investigations. Friends of the victims found themselves defending their names online while grieving privately. Innocent people were publicly accused without evidence. Behind the scenes, investigators were working through thousands of tips, surveillance videos, and forensic evidence. The scale of the investigation was enormous. Detectives reconstructed timelines, mapped phone data, and interviewed dozens of individuals connected to the victims. Weeks passed without an arrest. Then investigators began focusing on surveillance footage collected from the neighborhood. Among hours of recordings, one detail kept appearing: a white Hyundai Elantra driving near the house during the early morning hours of the murders. The vehicle didn't appear randomly. It circled the area multiple times before and after the estimated time of the attacks. That pattern suggested familiarity with the location or intention. Police publicly announced they were searching for information about the vehicle and its driver. The request seemed simple, but it marked a turning point in the investigation. As tips flooded in, law enforcement quietly began connecting the vehicle to a man living nearby. Bryan Kohberger was a doctoral student studying criminology at Washington State University, located just across the state border from Moscow. His academic focus centered on criminal behavior, forensic analysis, and the psychological patterns of offenders. He drove a white Hyundai Elantra. Investigators examined Kohberger's movements using phone data. Records indicated that his phone had been near the King Road residence multiple times in the months leading up to the murders. Late-night visits, repeated patterns, unexplained presence near the home. On the night of the murders, his phone stopped transmitting location data during the critical window of time. Hours later, it began transmitting again. For investigators, that gap raised serious questions. Meanwhile, forensic teams made another critical discovery at the crime scene. A knife sheath had been left behind. It was a small detail, but it carried enormous weight. The sheath contained DNA evidence that did not belong to any of the victims or residents of the house. Through advanced forensic analysis and investigative genealogy, the DNA was eventually linked to Bryan Kohberger. Surveillance later tracked Kohberger driving across the country to Pennsylvania, where his parents lived. Law enforcement followed him quietly, gathering additional evidence and monitoring his behavior. On December 30th, 2022, law enforcement executed an arrest warrant at his parents' home. Kohberger was taken into custody without incident. The arrest brought relief to many, but it also introduced new fears and new questions. How had someone studying criminal behavior allegedly committed such a violent crime? Was it fascination, obsession, or something deeper? As the case moved through the legal system, prosecutors built their argument around a combination of physical evidence, digital tracking, and behavioral patterns. The knife sheath DNA, phone location data, vehicle surveillance, and investigative timelines formed the backbone of the case. Families of the victims attended hearings, often sitting only feet away from the man accused of killing their children. Court proceedings became emotional battlegrounds where grief collided with legal procedure. Throughout the investigation and legal process, Kohberger maintained a composed public demeanor. He did not provide a detailed explanation for his actions, leaving families and the public searching for answers that may never come. Eventually, faced with overwhelming evidence, Bryan Kohberger pleaded guilty to the murders. The plea eliminated the need for a lengthy trial, but also meant that many details would never be publicly explored in testimony. The sentencing ensured Kohberger would spend the rest of his life in prison. For the families, the legal outcome offered justice but not closure. Closure is complicated when loss arrives without explanation. The impact of the murders extended far beyond Moscow. Universities across the country reevaluated campus safety. Students reconsidered how secure shared housing really was. Parents struggled with the realization that danger can exist even in communities historically considered safe. The house on King Road eventually became a symbol of collective trauma. A location once associated with youth and friendship transformed into a reminder of how quickly life can change. Even now, years later, unanswered questions linger. Investigators have never confirmed a clear motive. The connection between Kohberger and the victims remains a subject of speculation. Some theories suggest fixation, others suggest random targeting. Without a full confession, certainty remains out of reach. Cases like this force society to confront unsettling truths about violence and human behavior. They challenge assumptions about who commits crimes and why. They remind communities that safety is often fragile and unpredictable. The lives of Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan continue to be remembered through memorials, scholarships, and advocacy efforts created by their families and friends. Their stories did not end with their deaths. They continue through the people who loved them and the awareness their tragedy created. As you reflect on this case, it's natural to feel anger, sadness, confusion, or fear. True crime stories are not just about investigation and justice. They are about people whose lives mattered long before tragedy defined them. If you've watched this far, take a moment to share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. Which part of this case affected you the most? Do you believe some questions will always remain unanswered? Engaging in respectful conversation helps keep the memory of the victims alive and encourages awareness about safety, accountability, and justice. If stories like this are important to you, consider liking and sharing this video. It allows these stories to reach others who care about understanding the truth and remembering the lives behind the headlines. Because while the legal case may be closed, the emotional and cultural impact continues. For students left their homes for college, chasing dreams and independence, their journeys ended in a way no family could ever prepare for. Their names remain etched into a story that serves as both a warning and a remembrance. And in quiet towns across the world, the events of that night stand as a reminder that darkness sometimes appears where it is least expected. Their story is not just about how they died. It is about how they lived and why they should never be forgotten.